The ghosts of the Venetian shadows. In the winding labyrinth of Venice's alleys, where the fog clings to the canals like a shroud, legends drift as freely as the water beneath the gondolas. The city, with its crumbling facades and dimly lit corridors, holds many secrets, and those secrets, as they say, do not rest easily. It was during one such mist-laden night that Isabella Conti found herself lost in the heart of Venice. The streets, which she had known since childhood, seemed foreign, twisted by the fog that played tricks on her senses. She had been visiting her nonna, who lived in a small apartment off the beaten tourist path, when she decided to take a shortcut back to her own place. The route, normally straightforward, now spiraled into unfamiliar territory. The hour was late, and the city, usually alive with the hum of activity, had fallen eerily silent. The only sounds were the soft lapping of the water against the stone and the occasional distant creak of an old wooden door. Isabella's steps echoed unnervingly as she hurried along, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at her. She turned a corner and found herself in a narrow calle, the kind of alleyway that Venice has in abundance, but which always seems a little too narrow, a little too dark. Ahead, a bridge arched gracefully over a small canal, but what caught Isabella's eye was the figure standing at its crest. A man draped in black, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Isabella froze. The man didn't move. He seemed to be waiting. Gathering her courage, she approached slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to peer at his face, but the shadows clung to him, as though they were part of his very being. As she stepped onto the bridge, the fog swirled around her, thickening like a blanket. The figure remained still, and Isabella felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Scusi, signore," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you help me find the way to Campo San Polo?" The man did not respond immediately. When he finally did speak, his voice was like the wind rustling through dead leaves, soft, barely there, and yet it carried a weight. That made Isabella's blood run cold. "Beware the shadows, Signorina Conti. They are not what they seem." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. How did he know her name? She stepped back, but the fog thickened around her, obscuring her view. When she blinked, the man was gone, as if he had never been there at all. Panic set in, and Isabella turned to flee back the way she came, but the fog had transformed the alleyway into a maze of indistinct shapes and muted sounds. She ran blindly, her footsteps ringing out in a desperate rhythm. As she rounded another corner, she found herself in a small deserted piazza. In its center stood an ancient well, its stone worn smooth by centuries of use. But it was not the well that drew her attention. It was the ghostly figure hovering. Beside it, a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair cascading in waves down her back. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a sorrow that seemed to stretch across time itself. Isabella gasped and took a step back, but the ghost reached out a translucent hand. "Please," the spectre whispered, her voice tinged with despair. "Help me find my love. He waits for me, but I cannot reach him." A cold wind swept through the piazza, carrying with it a soft, mournful wail. Isabella wanted to turn and run, to escape this nightmare, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She had heard the tales. Everyone in Venice had, about the ghost of Maria Contarini, a noblewoman who had thrown herself into the canals centuries ago after her lover had been lost at sea. Her spirit was said to roam the city on nights like this, searching endlessly for her lost love. But these were just stories, weren't they? Isabella shook her head, trying to dispel the terror that gripped her heart. I can't help you," she stammered, backing away. The ghost's expression turned from sorrow to something darker, a flicker of anger passing over her spectral features. "Then you will share my fate," she hissed, her voice rising to a shriek that pierced the night. Isabella turned and fled, her pulse hammering in her ears. The fog seemed to part for her now, guiding her steps as she ran through the twisting alleys. She didn't stop until she burst into the familiar warmth of her nonna's apartment, slamming the door behind her. Breathless and shaking, she leaned against the door, her mind racing. Had it all been real? The man on the bridge, the ghost by the well? Or was it just the fog and her imagination playing tricks on her? But as she glanced down at her hand, she saw it. An old, tarnished locket hanging from a delicate chain. She had never seen it before, but there it was, resting in her palm as though it had been there all along. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a small, faded portrait of a man and a woman, their expressions frozen in a moment of happiness long past. The woman was Maria Contarini. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. The locket was warm, almost as if it had a life of its own. She heard the ghost's words echo in her mind. "Help me find my love." That night, as she lay into bed, sleep eluded her. The city outside was quiet once more, but the shadows on the walls seemed to move, whispering secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Venice, it seemed, had chosen her to unravel a mystery older than the city itself. And as she finally drifted into a restless sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. In a city where the past and present intertwined, where the dead whispered through the mist, perhaps some legends were meant to be lived rather than forgotten. The next morning, the fog lifted, but the locket remained, a reminder that in Venice the ghosts were never far away.